Now we cross over to our Ocean for global insight and an in-depth look at important development in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Mark, and good morning to you. Well, the leaders of the United States and China, they're going to meet on Monday at a virtual summit amid the intensifying rivalry between the two superpower countries. And tensions are high over trade, Taiwan, military capabilities and human rights. But expectations of a breakthrough between the two leaders are quite low. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki suggested that there wouldn't be any major outcomes and that Presidents Joe Biden and Xi Jinping would discuss how to manage the country's competition and cooperate in areas of common interest. Nevertheless, anticipation for Monday's virtual meeting is very high, and today on Global Insight we discuss what the leaders might talk about in their first summit. For this, we're joined by Neysun Mahboubi, research scholar at the Center for the Study of Contemporary China at the University of Pennsylvania. He's also a lecturer in law at Penn Law School. We also have joining us Brendon O'Connor, Associate Professor in American Politics at the United States Studies Center at the University of Sydney. So, well, a very warm welcome to you both on a Monday morning, Sunday evening to you in the US. And, well, let's start with you, Dr. Mahboubi. Now, ahead of Biden and Xi's summit on Monday, the United States and China, they unexpectedly agreed to cooperate on tackling climate change in a breakthrough deal at COP26, which included cutting methane and illegal deforestation. But do you think the two superpowers are going to be able to branch out their cooperation to more sensitive areas? I mean, there does seem to be more areas of disagreement than ones for potential cooperation at the moment.
Well, I think everyone would agree that the announcement of the joint statement at the COP26 meeting was surprising. We weren't expecting it, and it came as, I think, welcome news to those who were hoping to see the US and China be able to act somewhat collaboratively on this most critical global issue. Of course, it's better to have that as the immediate predicate to the Monday night a summit between Presidents Biden and Xi than not to have it. And the question, of course, is then, does it set a tone for a more cooperative discussion? That's probably too much to ask, but certainly better to have that as a predicate than not to have it. And it does seem that even though there are many issues of great concern in the relationship and many issues that the two sides see quite differently, there is at least some runway here for a minimally productive meeting and potentially even some clear outcomes in the same vein as the joint statement on climate.
Now, Dr. O'Connor, to bring you into the conversation. Well, the phone call between the US Secretary of State and China's Foreign Minister on Friday, they appear to confirm the strong differences between the two sides on a range of major geopolitical issues like trade, human rights, military build-up in the Indo-Pacific, and Taiwan, of course, as well as cybersecurity. And all of them are admittedly very pressing issues. But which do you think are going to be prioritized at this meeting?
Probably the issue of Taiwan. I mean, China will want the issue of trade to be at the fore. I mean, China wants some changes to some of the tariffs and restrictions that Donald Trump had brought in. So that's their point of wanting some kind of leverage. And I think the United States will want to focus on Taiwan, reducing the amount of Chinese sort of Air Force activity. And the Chinese will probably want a reduction in American naval activity around Taiwan. So there could be in some ways a compromise on that issue, that both sides pull back from having their military near Taiwan. And the trade issue, there is some push from the American sort of Chamber of Commerce, some of the business elements, to want a more stable and predictable trade environment. So that is definitely a carrot that I think the Biden administration can use. China, all economies coming out of COVID have some vulnerabilities, and I think the Chinese want to see some progress on trade, getting involved in the new version of the TPP in the Asia Pacific. So, you know, it's a good thing they're talking. Maybe not. It's mainly only a first step, as the previous panelist said. The climate announcement is important, a big deal, and hopefully again a step towards more substantial action. So, you know, low expectations, but at least conversations are occurring rather than talk of a new Cold War and the build-up of tensions that we saw in the early Reagan administration, where there was very little talking between the Soviet Union and the Reagan administration. Once talking begins, surprising things can happen. It doesn't always lead in a positive direction, but at least it's a start.
Well, it's quite clear that one of the biggest sticking points is Taiwan. And Dr. Mahboubi, we've seen both military and diplomatic tensions escalating to dangerous levels across the Taiwan Strait in recent weeks. And well, it seems clear that none of the leaders are going to budge on the issue of Taiwan's sovereignty and other issues surrounding the island. And China has also shown its intention to coerce Taipei into unification talks by 2027, according to Pentagon report. How do you think President Biden is going to address this in his summit?
Well, I definitely agree that it's going to be a major topic of discussion at the meeting, just as it was at the meeting between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Foreign Minister Wang Yi on the sidelines of the G20 meeting. That said, I think both sides have an interest in stability. Neither side wants to see something go over the rails. And so we are seeing both sides make their points about the situation clear. Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, has been referencing the Taiwan Relations Act every time he talks about the One China policy. On the Chinese side, both in words and in actions, they are making their position clear. But this would be devastating for both countries and for the world for there to be some kind of actual conflict over Taiwan in the near future. And I think everyone is clear about that. So while I do think this will be a topic of discussion, I don't think I'm too concerned about going over the guardrails. And I think that there will be other topics that are also addressed in the meeting, whether it be trade, maybe nuclear, maybe public health, maybe climate, that will go beyond simply the Taiwan issue.
And Dr. O'Connor, military tension has been building in the Indo-Pacific region where we are. And well, with China, of course, flying an unprecedented number of fighter jets above Taiwanese airspace and reports of its fast-evolving nuclear capabilities. And well, the country's been quite nervous itself about the formation of the AUKUS pact and the role of Quad in the region. How do you think the two leaders are going to address these kind of tensions?
Yes, it's a very good question. I mean, AUKUS sends a signal to China that the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia are playing a minor sort of deputy sheriff role coming along as well. It does send, I think, a fairly overt message to China that it is the focus of those three Anglosphere nations. I think it probably overstates where Australia should be. I mean, Australia should be sort of looking to sort of have a much more, I think, productive diplomatic relationship with China, rather than this probably overemphasis in our recent foreign policy on military affairs. So I think if we can move the discussions to diplomacy, to economic issues, there is environmental issues, there's more grounds for cooperation. If it's sort of logjammed and stuck on military issues and territorial issues, then I don't see this as being a very productive meeting. And that's where a lot of the discussion has been in most of this year on the territorial and military. And so how you create some goodwill and a sort of common cause, maybe on the environmental issue, because it's such an obviously global and pressing issue, and then maybe seek to deal with the territorial issues later, just as in some ways human rights is being put sort of somewhat to the side of the agenda because there's not really much common ground on that issue clearly at the moment.
There certainly has been a great amount of attention on the military side of things here in the Indo-Pacific. And Dr. Mahboubi, a recent Pentagon report revealed that China is building up its nuclear capabilities at very alarming speed. And the country hasn't responded to Washington's previous calls for it to join arms control talks with Moscow. Do you think this is going to be addressed at the summit?
By all indications, it will probably be raised by President Biden. It's not clear to me that there will be much of a productive dialogue on it because as far as we can tell so far, The Chinese are not particularly interested in discussing nuclear nonproliferation outside of the context of the United Nations. Yes, absolutely, the Pentagon's report made a big impression within the policy community here, as did the hypersonic missile test not long before that. So absolutely, it's something that President Biden will go into the meeting hoping to discuss. And of course, he will raise the U.S. position on these questions, but it's not one of the areas where I would expect a particularly fruitful dialogue with President Xi and Chinese counterparts at this meeting.
And Dr. Mahboubi, while summits and international cooperation, it's all about give and take, and it seems like the two leaders don't have much to give away. But China's sixth plenum meeting, the plenum assembly, it recently sealed President Xi's status as a so-called forever president. Do you think this is going to make him more unyielding in the international community? How do you think he intends to compete with the United States in the long run?
Well, let me first just say that I do think that there are some issues that there's runway for both countries going to this meeting, and in particular, trade issues. And also potentially the response to COVID-19. On trade issues, the U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai has said on multiple occasions recently that she's having productive dialogues with her counterparts, and it makes sense because, as was said earlier, both economies are coming out of this difficult period. There are economic strains visible in both countries, and both presidents, in different ways, have to respond to these pressures. Yes, President Xi Jinping has just come out of the sixth plenum meeting, which of course everyone knows has solidified even further his position. President Biden, people say that he's had some political bumps recently, but he also has just had a big political victory in this infrastructure bill. And I think both of them can go in with some degree of strength, but also an ongoing interest in economic development, in maintaining some economic stability. Neither side wants to see the economic issues that are palpable in both countries become bigger issues, whether it be inflation in the U.S. or various things that are going on in China. And so I do think there will be runway for there to be a very productive discussion on trade issues and potentially some deliverables in terms of ongoing meetings that come out of this summit.
And Dr. O'Connor, do you think President Xi is going to invite Joe Biden to the 2022 Olympics in Beijing?
Yes, that seems possible. I mean, that I think would be the hope for China, to see a number of world leaders there. This is a showcase event for China, so they certainly do not want any boycott by leaders. I mean, I think one of the other points about the summit is to get on the sort of path of deputies meetings, make sure that there's engagement and discussions between US military leaders and Chinese military leaders. So these summits, we obviously focus on the two presidents, but if you can get a lot of the other background meetings going, in some ways it opens up dialogue, it probably reduces tensions. As we saw at the end of the Trump administration, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff being able to talk with his Chinese counterpart and reassure them about events going on in America that were extraordinary was useful. So I think that that's part of the process here, is setting up lower level meetings and signaling that, in some ways you can turn the relationship into a more bureaucratic relationship rather than one of sort of symbolic sort of rhetoric.
Yes, well, former President Trump did say he was best friends with Xi Jinping, and perhaps we won't see that kind of relationship. But Dr. Mahboubi, how do you think this personal engagement between the two leaders will turn out? Do you think it will help diffuse some of the tension?
Well, one thing that's very useful is that some of the performance that both sides felt they needed to do has been done. Most famously in that very contentious meeting in Alaska back in March. Also, to some extent, with Wendy Sherman's visit to China, and then John Kerry's visit to China. So some of the atmospherics that maybe both sides felt they needed to perform for their own domestic audiences has been taken care of. And now we go into this meeting where there's no need for that. And I think neither president at the top of the hierarchy would be particularly interested in that. One thing that, it seems a little bit too bad is that if this was an in-person meeting, we would see the sort of famous people skills of President Biden be put to the test to see how far he could get. Of course, he knows Xi Jinping from many years past, but I don't know if that's as easy to convey in virtual settings. But I'm sure he will try, and probably there will be at least more of that dynamic than the more contentious dynamic that we saw in Alaska and elsewhere.
Well, maybe he'll have to rely on some Zoom emojis and reactions, but well, we'll have to see how this summit goes. And this is where we're going to end the interview today. That was Neysun Mahboubi at the University of Pennsylvania and Brendon O'Connor at the University of Sydney. Thank you both so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you.